As your party sneaks through the dusty, cobwebbed halls of the abandoned library, it feels as if something is watching you from the shadows. You can see something darting between them, but you can't tell what it is. Suddenly, you feel something pierce your mind, and as you look over, you see the paladin standing next to you fall to his knees as you see his life energy be drained away from his face. From out of the shadows, you see a large, glowing green eye staring at you. It moves closer, and a wretched, hunched creature walks into view, covered in grayish-brown, almost rotting skin, with massive, sharp spines coming out of its back. You shudder to think at what foul sorcery created this beast. You feel your mind get penetrated again, and the creature tries to rip secrets from your mind. This, adventurers, is a Nothic. Hail and well met to adventurers and dungeon masters alike. Welcome to episode 2 of my continuing series, Menagerie of Monsters, where I take a creature from the books of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and I talk about its lore and its abilities, and in some cases, I will be trying to voice act the creature. Before we get into things, please hit that like button, and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, because it helps out the channel, and it helps me reach bigger audiences, and you'll never miss out on another video again. With all that out of the way, let's jump into it. Today's monster, the Nothic, comes to us from the Monster Manual. The Nothic is an interesting monster, and it's something that can serve not only as a general kill it till it's dead monster, but it can also serve as a plot hook. While its entry in the Monster Manual is fairly short, it's only one page, and its large picture and stat block takes up most of the page. Its lore sections are quite juicy and full of ideas. The Nothic is, in one way or another, a failed lich. According to the Monster Manual, the lich god Vecna left a curse behind in the material plane that will transform power-hungry wizards into degenerate, wretched Nothics. Of course, which being left behind this curse could easily be changed if a figure like Vecna doesn't fit into your world and the lore that you've written for it. How the wizard is transformed into a Nothic is left unsaid, something that I think adds very well to the Nothic's mystique. Perhaps a lich-making ritual goes wrong, and rather than turn into the desiccated skeletal creature we all know and love, it turns into a rotted, one-eyed wretch. Perhaps it's from a bit of knowledge that just isn't meant for mortal minds, something sort of Lovecraftian in that vein. But nobody truly knows what it is. However, other than the physical, there are a few other important changes that occur to the wizard that really define what the Nothic is. For one, the Nothic loses all sense and memory of its former life. It knows no spells and, in fact, has no capacity to learn spells, something that is indicated pretty explicitly in the Monster Manual. So whereas with some creatures, if you want them to be a spellcaster, sure, you can go ahead and give them 2 levels of wizard and give them some spells to cast. You can't really do that with the Nothic because it is fairly evident that it is unable to use magic at all. However, despite this inability to use it, it still seeks out magical knowledge despite not being able to use it. Nothics are typically found because of this in places of magical scholarship, perhaps an abandoned library or some sort of reliquary. Perhaps a Nothic or a band of them have invaded a magical university and are causing havoc among the students. Even more importantly than that is the innate need of a Nothic to discover a cure for its condition. Part of a Nothic's curse is this intense gut feeling that somewhere in the world or in the multiverse, there is some spell or ritual or something that can turn it back into a humanoid. This is what motivates them and what drives them to do everything. And that's why they seek out magical knowledge in the hopes that someday they'll come across some ancient tome that has the proper ritual in it. Whether that spell or ritual truly exists is intentionally left vague, something that, once again, adds to their mystery. And I think this is something that a dungeon master can definitely play around with, maybe rather than having a Nothic just be a villain. It can be a villain, but someone who's sympathetic, and maybe it triggers a high-level party who a Nothic would be absolutely nothing to them, no more than swatting a fly. Maybe they discover, rather than kill it, this high-level party goes out into the multiverse in search of this ancient ritual to free the Nothic of its curse. This is actually a good segue into the statistics of the Nothic, so let's move on over to that. Overall, the Nothic does have pretty good statistics, especially for a CR2 creature. The only thing that isn't great is its charisma, which is lower than a commoner's. Despite the low charisma, it still is a powerful roleplay monster. Perhaps a Nothic could be bargained with in exchange for magical knowledge. After all, they are neutral evil rather than chaotic evil, so they aren't entirely unreasonable. Very importantly, the Nothic has expertise in insight, something that makes its weird insight action potentially very powerful. In fact, Weird Insight is a wonderful ability, in my opinion, that is one of the few actual abilities in the game that calls for a skill contest rather than an attack roll or a saving throw. In this case, it pits the Nothic's insight against the target's deception. While it is listed as an action, Weird Insight would likely not be particularly useful during combat, but rather during a roleplay interaction, such as this. The disfigured thing stares at you, and you feel its gaze pierce your mind.
Ah, yes. Your sister, then. She is the reason you adventure. You can't stand to think of her. Her death pains you, and that is why you do not return home. Oakdale reminds you too much of her.
The Nothic is a great creature to use if you want to play with your PC's flaws and bonds and other personal traits, as its Weird Insight can reveal those to the Nothic, who can in turn reveal them to the party, perhaps creating a little bit of infighting, as the Nothic is a relatively weak creature. Additionally, its 120 feet of true sight can also reveal secrets. Perhaps a party member is a lycanthrope, and the party simply doesn't know it. It also renders illusion spells and the darkness spell completely useless, as the Nothic can just see right through them. Its rotting gaze ability is mediocre at best, as it has a low DC of just 12, and it only deals 3d6 damage, which could certainly be dangerous to a low-level wizard or sorcerer, but any of the other classes it likely won't do too much to. Its claws also only deal moderate damage, though it does have multi-attack, which is relatively uncommon for such a low CR monster. Overall, I would say that the Nothic is much better suited to be a roleplay monster and an interactive monster, rather than just throw it at your party and they hit it till it's dead. With unimpressive damage and fairly average hit points, the Nothic does make a good sort of hit-and-run monster. Comes in for a round, deals a little bit of damage, then retreats into the shadows, using its stealth bonus of +5 to hide and taunting the party from its hiding place, using Weird Insight to pull out the deepest fears and insecurities of the party. My biggest gripe with the Nothic is something very, very small, and that is its language. If you go by just the Monster Manual stat block, it only speaks Undercommon. Perhaps this is an unexplained result of its curse, but I think that it makes much more sense to simply switch its language to common, as it's only in rare circumstances that a PC is going to know Undercommon at all. And if no one in the party speaks Undercommon, then that's likely going to negate any roleplay ability, unless, of course, you decide to cast Comprehend Languages or Tongues or something of the sort. Overall, I think the Nothic is a strong and versatile monster. It has very, very high role-playing potential, though it's fairly weak in combat. If you've got a great story about one of these creatures or have ideas for what monsters I should do next in this series, leave a comment down below. I will read every single comment that you put down there. With that, I bid you farewell, and may your adventuring days be many more.